Why Media Group? The fastest growing media group in North America.
What does it mean for what's going on in the something that we've all been watching, which is the conflict that's been taking place between United States and Israel and Iran, which has essentially been the reason our gas prices have gone up, which essentially affects the prices in the grocery stores. So the latest right now is we know that April 7th it was the ceasefire right between U.S. and Iran and Israel. We know there was 10 points that Iran put forward for ending the war. And in those 10 points, the President Trump said those are things that could be negotiated on. One of the items being that Israel has to stop its occupation attacks in southern Lebanon. That did not happen. Essentially, Israel was carved out to continue doing what it's doing in Lebanon. Mind you, today, the leaders, not leaders, but representatives from both sides, from Israel and Lebanon, are meeting in the White House in Washington to essentially talk about some sort of a peace talks together. But that was carved out and that continued. So we had the meetings that took place in Islamabad over the weekend, heading with on the American side is VP JD Vance, who had the talks, and then you had the Iranian delegation. So what happened? We had a short press conference by Vice President JD Vance, essentially saying that they put their best offer forward to the Iranians and they failed to reach an agreement. Now, more details have come out of what happened in those talks, because if you recall, Vice President JD Vance did not go into detail about what those items were. So now it's come to light that essentially the items that were asked for, which I'll go into detail, are that the position that U.S. has. Before, it was President Trump was saying that they do not want Iran to have nuclear weapons. And in those negotiations, that changed more of a hard line that Iran should not enrich uranium or have enriched uranium nuclear capabilities, right? So not nuclear weapons, no enriched uranium, and nuclear capabilities, okay? And they said that they wanted to add about 20 years ban on Iran to do this. So had that been part of what was proposed before the talks in Islamabad, perhaps maybe Iran would have just refused it right away. But the talks continued and Iran came back with, no, we can't go with 20 years, but we can talk about maybe 3 to 4 years. 3 to 4 years is essentially Trump's the rest of his term to complete as his final term in the White House. So those were the red lines. And then we've heard reports that Vice President JD Vance was going in and out of the negotiations, making calls to the president of the United States, as well as the Prime Minister of Israel. Essentially, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu went on air to say that he's getting reports. He used the word reports from Vice President JD Vance on the negotiations. So we know that that was all involved and there was hard lines. And so why is that important? It's important because when those talks essentially didn't go anywhere, it wasn't closed, it wasn't ended, it's just they didn't come to an agreement, is what Vice President JD Vance said before he left. But since then, the United States has decided to create a blockade of Iranian ships in the Strait of Hormuz. If you recall, that was the contentious point when the ceasefire happened, that Iran was supposed to open up their stronghold on the Strait of Hormuz. And then now fast forward, after the talks didn't get to a place of agreement on this nuclear and enrichment activity, then the United States decided to create a blockade of the Iranian ships. And then Iran made a counter comment that if the United States does do that, then the ports of the GCC countries will be attacked. And so escalation's point. But now nothing of that type has happened yet. We've had reports that ships are passing through the Strait of Hormuz, even though the Iranians are there. Iranians said that the Strait of Hormuz is open for civilian traffic. and even though the American troops are there as well. So this is very critical. It still means that the ceasefire holds. The ceasefire was for 2 weeks. So we still have another week that the ceasefire is there for. So what does it mean right now in these 2 days since the talks in Islamabad? Well, essentially the U.S. is blocking. They said they're blocking all ships entering or leaving the Iranian ports, trying to create a way to say, Iran, we're going to prevent you from selling your oil, right? As you're preventing the GCC countries from selling their oil, we want to prevent you. Okay. They said about 10,000 U.S. personnel and warships have been deployed. Multiple ships have already turned back within the 24 hours. When they were in talks in Islamabad, essentially Iran said that naval ships came and then they were blocked and they turned away. So that was another thing that happened. A lot of different reports coming out at different times, and but essentially, as of today, it's been said that the ships have been passing, and it doesn't seem to be a massive issue. But obviously, this is a moving story, and it's still a fragile ceasefire. So we're going to see where that stands. Now, why is the Strait of Hormuz very important? Essentially, 20% of global oil supply comes out of there. And this is where it affects the price of oil per barrel, right? President Trump wants to keep it under $100 per barrel. But you know that when there's a conflict in the Strait of Hormuz, it can escalate and it can go above the $100, which we've seen. And yes, it disrupts the entire global trade flows. And, we've talked about this where many countries rely on oil from that region. South Korea, about 70%, Japan, 75%, India, 60%, China, 40%. But then it's also the fertilizer that needs to get out to, African countries, even India, South Asian countries, that their fertilizer comes from that region, and that essentially means further crop production for domestic use. So this is not just a regional issue, this is a global economy issue, which now we've seen, when it comes to Canada, us getting 10 cents relief on the liter for gas. Now, when it comes to what is the goal of this entire strategy, it's essentially to cripple Iran's oil exports and force concessions, right? Because we're told that they're going to meet again. That's what Vice President J.D. Vance said, that there'll be talks within the next couple of days, again in Islamabad. This is forced concessions in terms of U.S. showing their might that, hey, you didn't open the Strait of Hormuz when you said you would. And now, since we didn't come to an agreement, now we've put our forces there to block your exports. This is essentially, forcing some sort of concessions by showing the might of the United States without right now attacking each other when it comes to what we saw happen in that 40-day war.
Ymedia Group, the fastest growing media group in North America.